Question from the earlier session, Mr. Greenspan.
Thank you. I met with Mr. Steen in the break, and he gave me an update on the reserves as we were talking about the $8 million and the $6 million and why they don't carry forward. The explanation, as I understand it, the Economic Development Fund reserve of $8 million wouldn't carry forward because, in effect, it would be self-funding. The payback of the loans would cover the interest carry. In theory, the other was the $6 million for the scholarship program. The council would be responsible in out years to determining where those funds were to come from. But my question is, if we're to maintain a 25% reserve, and if I'm understanding this right, in 2012, the ending balance or the expenditures is $576 million. 25% of that's $144 million. I'm on page II2, which means that our fund balance, that our reserves cannot drop below $144 million. Does that sound about right, Mr. 25% of 576 million?
Mr. Chairman and the council member, I'm looking at page 2-2, general fund only.
Right.
And we're ending 2012 at 110.7 million. And I'm comparing that, if I take that 110.7 million, which incorporates the impact of those reservations on balance, and I compare it to the total expenditures of 354, I come up with 31.3%. Don't compare it to the Schedule 1, Section 2-1 is general fund and levy combined. If you flip to the next page, we're just comparing the general fund operating balance to the general fund only operating expense when we talk about the 25% reserve to expenditure ratio.
Okay, so if you're saying the total operating expenditures are $380,000 in 2012?
No, Mr. Chairman, no, they're 354 million.
I'm sorry, million, 354.
You know, I misspoke, and I said 2-2. It's actually the page right after 2-1. Maybe if I explain the schedules, it'll be helpful. If we start with Schedule 1, Section 2-1, that is the general fund and levy combined. We've historically always presented a roll-up of both the general fund operating and the levy fund combined to give the viewer and policymakers a sense of the dollars that come into the county to fund core operations, and which would include the subsidy to human services, because that is a core operation. So that we provide that report firstly rolled up with levy dollars. If you turn the page, we take that Schedule 1 and we break it down by general fund operating only, and that's where you can see that 25% target or threshold is pertinent to general fund operating only. We do not apply that to the combination of general fund and levy that you see on Schedule 1. So if you want to see where are we in terms of that reserve ratio, it's that second page for general fund operating only, and we're taking the ending balance net of reservations and comparing it to the total expenditures of 354. If you skip ahead, the next page just shows you a breakout of the levy fund only. If you go one more page to the true Section 2-2, those are general fund expenditures. They also include the other expenditures from the levy. So that would include Metro, Adams Board, and some others. So if you look at back to Section 2-1, foots to the total of 2-2. But when we're looking at reservations on balance and the reserve to balance ratio, we're looking at the general fund only schedule, which is at 354.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, so what you're saying is, I follow you now. I was looking at the combined. So the general fund, in order to stay above the 25% number that we use, would be $88.5 million.
Mr. Chairman, yes. If you do the math, it's a simple arithmetic. Yes, we can't drop below, and that's all things remaining the same. If expenditures decrease, obviously that threshold changes. But yes, it moves in proportion to budgeted expenditures.
The impact for the calves is is that $500,000? We heard that was $500,000 a week or $500,000 every 2 weeks.
Mr. Chairman and the council member, we have included a $500,000 set aside in case we have to pay more or contribute more to the debt service. we can talk more about this tomorrow when we go into the debt service budgets, but the county supports bonds that were issued for the Gateway Arena, which is now Progressive Loans Arena, or Quicken Loans Arena, not Progressive Field, Quicken Loans Arena. Total debt service is around $9.5 million per year, of which the county is anticipated to contribute about $3.5 million in general fund dollars. The remaining $6 million is supposed to come from other sources, other project sources, namely admission tax, and we get some med tax from the Positively Cleveland organization. Those admission taxes will decline if pieces of the NBA season for this year are cut out in their entirety. We will not be receiving those tax dollars, those admission tax dollars, which means we'll have less to offset the general fund portion of the Gateway Arena bonds. So we've right now anticipated a loss of $500,000. The sooner they get the season under the way, the more people they have in the seats paying those admission taxes, that would be helpful. There are other events at the arena that do provide admission taxes. The Lake Erie Monsters is an example. And I think any of the other events, concerts, if you will, there is a separate events tax that we receive revenue for, and that flows into our pledge fund to offset debt service. So right now, we will most likely collect less in admission taxes because we know the season is going to be delayed. If there's an impact on attendance because of the team is not as good or people don't attend the games as much, that would have an impact on that revenue also in the future years.
If Mr. Chair, if the Cavs were not to go into season this year, what's our exposure?
I'll do this from memory, Councilman Greenspan, but I think we would expect between $3.5 and $4 million in admission taxes. I can get you the exact number from last year to give you a comparison of what that admission tax normally brings in, with the caveat that rolled into that number are admission taxes charged for non-Cavalier related games.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Here's my overall concern with the 25%. We have, I say only, not to make little, of $22 million. With this budget, we only have $22 million effectively in perpetuity before we hit the 25% mark, because our expenses actually remain fairly flat. I'm not going to say that they jog up and down a little bit. So as we start thinking about funding other projects out of reserves, if our operations can't cover it, we only have $22 million before we'll have probably a negative impact on our bond rating. So as we move forward, for example, if the scholarship fund at $6 million a year continues to be funded as it is this year, we'll only have 3 more years to fund it, assuming all of our revenue sources stay the same, we don't have a dip, and our expenses are flat before we start getting into an area of concern for our bond rating. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. We are not funding the county's operations from operating income. We are into our savings account, so to speak.
Mr. Chairman, yes, if we were to go below that level, also keep in mind that the assumptions do change. In the write-up, the last few pages of the budget summary, and also in appendix, I think it's C, the 5-year forecast does show us in the out years bringing in additional revenue above anticipated expenditures. So we do have, based on our assumptions right now, we're at least structurally balanced and anticipate some revenue or increase in that reserve, all things remaining the same. But again, changes in expense patterns, if we have to pay more on the debt service for Gateway in 1 year or more years, any other changes in expenditure revenue patterns would impact that. We do have a fairly strong, it's actually a very strong policy that 25% is 10% above the recommended best practice of 15%. So we still do maintain one of the stronger reserve requirements as compared to our other peer counties and cities.
Councilman Tran.
Based on Mr. Greenspan's questions, and he was talking about the debt service and the bond rating. Correct me if I'm wrong, in regards to the percentage to which Cuyahoga County has versus other counties, of which I think Hamilton County and I think even Columbus itself do not carry the same kind of percentage of reserves that we do. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman and the council member, that is correct. We do meet with our peer counties on a periodic basis by phone conference, and what we've seen over the past 3 or 4 years, a lot of our the larger urban counties have struggled to maintain even their lower existing threshold. I know some of the counties have dipped below 10%. I can't remember which county it was, but I think at one point one of the counties was approaching 5%. And I know there's been some issues related to the economy, mostly the revenues dip, and it's harder to change the dollars you have to spend. So we've been able to weather this period of economic decline and the subsequent rebound and maintain above that 25%. So we have some buffer, and that's on top of, again, that very strong policy of 25%. And I don't remember or recall what the average policy limit is, but it's usually around the 15% range for our peer counties, at least in Ohio. It may differ by some of the other larger counties in other states.
And some of those counties actually, like I think Columbus actually ends up with a AAA rating, even though I don't believe they have the same kind of bond rating, the same kind of reserves we're holding. Is that correct?
Well, Mr. Chairman and the council member, I know Franklin County does have a AAA. They do not do a very large amount of general obligation issuance. They do a lot of revenue bonds, which is helpful. And over the past few years, they've had a very large reserve rate. They increased their sales tax, I think, around 2006. And I'm not sure what the policy reasons were or why, but they were bringing in an immense amount of money, more so than what they were expending on an annual basis. So they've accumulated this large reserve, which I think as of 2010 into this year, they've started to eat away at that balance. I don't know specifically what their policy target is or where they're at now, but they were fairly high a few years ago because of that.
And to the chair, don't misunderstand my questions. I'm not a big spend, folks, as far as pushing that out there. But by the same token, I didn't want automatically to follow Mr. Greenspan's logic that just because we touch on that 25%, that it automatically means that our bond rating would not be able to go up to the AAA, which I think Franklin County has exhibited that they have been able to be satisfactory.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's correct, Councilman Schron. It really, if for some reason, through proactive budget management and other measures, you can't stop going below that rate, it should be temporary, and you simply present a plan to citizens, policymakers, rating agencies. How are we going to get back to our original threshold, or if we're going to make a change in policy, what is the justification? Either way, it's very important to explain, communicate, and come up with a plan to recover if you do go below that rate. Right now, as you can see, we're not planning to go below that threshold based on what we've presented in this budget.
And just one more question on the revenue side. You indicated that, at least I thought, that you were doing no forecasting of additional revenue coming through casino project, which if we follow their logic that they told us, we're looking at between 2 and 3 million people coming to the county, using the bed tax, using all the food that they would hopefully be buying at the restaurants and the taxes according to that, and then the other areas of tax that is not even factored into this budget, is my understanding. And that'll go online in February 2013.
Mr. Chairman,
2012,
yes.
Sorry.
Councilman Schron, we do, again, we temper our trend to 3%, knowing that we will have additional people in the county spending dollars. There is a multiplier. In terms of casino revenue, we don't show the revenue in this budget. And right now, based on information we know, there quite possibly will be no net revenue impact from additional or from casino revenue, because there is a very good possibility the state will reduce our local government fund allocation in the exact amounts of any casino revenue that we realize. It's not finalized, but that's what we've been instructed. We've talked to several people. We've talked to some people at the County Commissioner Association of Ohio, and they laughed at us when we asked that question. They said, no, you're most likely going to see a cut in your LGF allocation and the like amounts of your casino revenue. We'll have to see, but for right now, we're not showing a net positive impact of casino revenue in this budget. If they scrap that plan, or we know for certain that we will benefit on a net basis from casino revenue, we'll include it in this budget, but for now it's not. And I did check with our other peer counties, Hamilton, Franklin, they're not including it either.
Okay, now my colleagues, I would ask you to please turn your attention to page Roman numeral 2-3, which is the general operating fund, Schedule 2, and general fund. No, I'm sorry. Roman numeral 2-5. Which is the general fund departmental summary. And Director Rubino is going to take us through line by line this schedule and the schedule on the following page. And I know this is going to be somewhat tedious, but it's going to give us a good overview from the 30,000-foot level of the various changes, initiatives, and things that are affected, the different line items for the departments that are in the budget. Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've agreed to do this if you don't ask any questions. Not really, I'm just joking. A few notes on the book, if I may, before I get into going through the individual departmental budgets. The schedules are the detailed numbers or financial reports of the budget. That is the budget. And we provide these schedules not just in our proposed budget document, but when we do a quarterly update, you'll see these schedules in this format. And we're trying to present to you general fund and levy fund at a high level, revenue by source, expense by use, reservations on balance. And then we get into these schedules like we're looking at right now, Schedule 2, where we're showing you, well, how do we spend those dollars on a budgetary basis by departmental, what we call departmental budget. And that's what the schedule we're going to go through conveys. We also provide you the same schedule on an all funds basis. So we're going to be looking at the general fund components of these departments. Some departments have multiple fund budgets, so their all funds budget could be substantially larger than their general fund budget. Some agencies will not show up in the schedule because they're not general fund agencies. For example, the Road and Bridge County Engineer, it's not a general fund agency. You won't see it on this schedule, and some of the others will not show up on this schedule. We also provide you a schedule that shows how do we spend levy dollars. That's the Schedule 7. That's towards the back of this section 2. And if you want, we can touch on that. But again, the idea is the numbers you see in the write-ups, the numbers you see in the departmental sections will tie to these schedules. So this is the technical financial piece reporting, and the narrative and the high-level analysis and description of budgets follows throughout the document. So if we look at Schedule 2, first thing you'll see, this report is grouped into 3 areas. We look at top group is executive agencies, those agencies that are now under direction of the county executive, which are the original Board of Commissioner agencies, but also the former elected official agencies that are now consolidated under the county executive, and you'll see those budgets first. And they're not necessarily in alphabetical order. We look at them functionally and logically, which should the order be, and that's why you'll see they're not necessarily in an alphabetical listing. The middle section are our elected officials, so mainly the courts, and we also have the county prosecutor and county council are in that grouping. The last section are independent boards and commissions. These may be county operations that are internal to the county that have an operating budget. They also include any dollars we provide to an outside board by way of a line item budget. It may not be an operating budget of the county, but there are dollars budgeted in the county's general fund budget to these outside entities, and that's the 3rd section. We call that boards and commissions. So if I go up to the top, across the top we provide you a couple years of activity. The 2011 current budget, which is the approved budget as of mid-year. So any revisions that were made to the approved operating budget are in that current number. The 2011 projection as of mid-year, we've done some updates here and there based on things that have changed since July. And then we provide you the 2012 and 2013 proposed budget numbers. What I'm going to key in is on the column for 2012 proposed budget. And we can just go down through this list. Starting with the county executive, this is the appropriation that's in place for the county executive staff and also for any of the lobbying contracts and some of the other major contracts that we appropriate within the county executive. And that's been past practice. The county administration budget in previous years was the place where we house these contracts, and we're doing the same thing here. The executive budget is the place where we house the countywide lobbying contracts and some other management contracts that are in here. And these were described as part of the second quarter report and update process. So there's nothing new in that budget. It's the same level of staff. Actually, you'll have 2 staff are going to be moved to a new communications department. There's going to be some consolidation of public affairs and communications staff. It's not reflected in these reports yet. That's something that's going to be presented later on in the process, but what you'll see is a consolidated communications department, and there'll probably be a reduction of communications staff countywide as a result of that consolidation. I just wanted to make that note. I think the chief of staff may go into this during their presentation tomorrow. County Law Department is next. This is a full annual budget for staffing the county law department. We have 9 staff allotted right now, That's based on guidance we received from the law director on the number of staff they'll need to have a fully functional law department, and that shows you what the annual cost of that is. There are some shared contracts in there also. So it's a brand new department that started this year. Human resources. This budget has increased by over $1 million, and that is because we're consolidating human resource staff in one budget. Currently, across county executive agencies, there are human resource staff embedded within those operating budgets. And what we're proposing to do here is consolidate the HR function, operations and staff, under one unified human resource budget for the county executive, and that's why that number increases. So what you saw were reductions in the various executive agencies, pulled those dollars out of their budgets and migrated them to this unified human resource budget, and that's the reason for the increase. Countywide, we're spending about the same on human resources in general, and there's going to be, as Director Harrell will explain, going to be a more focus on human resource analysts, not administrative staff and clerks, and that's going to be to the benefit of the county as a whole. County administrative divisions, that budget goes away starting in 2012. That formerly housed the Office of Budget Management, which is now in fiscal, the old county administrator index, the prior accounts for the clerk of the board, which has now been replaced by clerk of council, and some of the other areas that were part of the old administration. That would include OPD is also moved out of there down to the fiscal office. So that's why that's zeroed out. And this reflects the transition to our new structure of administration and fiscal operations starting next year. Moving down, we have development. Excuse me. The development budget only reflects the general fund portion for their operations. So it's their staff that are part of the general fund, and it's also discretionary dollars that they have in their budget and a few other contracts. The county has more development dollars embedded elsewhere in some of the loan programs that operate. The general fund supports debt service on a variety of economic development bonds that you don't see here in this $3.6 million budget for development. And there are also some other areas that don't show up there. We also have the implementation of the loan fund that's not reflected in this budget. That's going to show up as a separate county budget once that's in place, and we've accounted for how we want to expend those dollars. So that's really the staff and operations for development. Moving down to county fiscal office, the almost $18 million is the general fund portion only. And that would be general accounting, the Office of Budget Management, OPD, the treasurer, the general fund portion of the treasurer, and the former recording and audit functions that were general fund are in this number. What we've done with our reporting structure is consolidated the former entities that are now under fiscal. So if you read across this line, starting in 2009, where it's at $22.8 million, that's the cost, the comparable cost for all those agencies. We pulled them together in one line so you can see on a like comparison how that cost has gone down. If you go to Schedule 5, you'll see the total budget for the county fiscal office is larger than the $18 million. It's more in the $40 million range, and that's because they have a large source of funding in both the Real Estate Assessment Fund, which funds the appraisal and tax assessment areas of fiscal, and the DTAC fund also funds a good portion of the treasurer's operations. So this is not the total budget for the fiscal office, it's the general fund piece only. Going down to Public Works Essential Services, this is the general fund portion of the building facilities budget. It's mostly administrative and some other areas. There's a larger piece of that central services budget that's in that internal service fund structure we discussed earlier. So this is only the general fund portion. That's mostly staff and some shared contracts that are in that line. Moving down to county sheriff, this is the largest of the general fund budgets, and that $80 million is the general fund piece. So that covers their administration and staff, covers the jail operation. In fact, I think approximately $56 million of that money, of that budget is for jail operations, the staff, the materials, the cost to run the jail. And then also the law enforcement piece of the county sheriff's general fund budget, which would include the $1 million community policing initiative is in there, and some of the other programs that are general funded programs are in that number. The other portion of the sheriff's budget of roughly $11 million is budgeted in an internal service fund, and that's the security budget. So this $80 million includes everything, just about everything, except the security officer budget, which provides security to county agencies and buildings. And they also have some restricted use budgets. Concealed carry, for example, they're not part of that general fund budget. The total of which you can see on Schedule 5, or when you have a chance, if you go back to Appendix A, we provide you the individual budgets by account and object for every single department on here if you want to see what makes up these numbers. Moving down, boarding care prisoners. This is the cost of housing outside prisoners and the medical costs. It's come down substantially for a variety of reasons. We're just under $1 million. It used to be, 09, it was $5 million. I think it was $8 million the year before, so it's come down considerably, and that's based on current estimates right now, that almost $1 million estimate for next year, so considerable savings over the past few years. Public Safety and Justice Services, this is the general fund piece of that budget based on the newly approved organizational structure. They have other funding sources that won't show up in this line item budget. They're not just general fund. There's the CRIS budget, the CCOMS budget, and some other areas that are special use funds. They also receive some levy subsidy that won't show up in the general fund piece of the Justice Services budget. Clerk of Courts, this is the portion for the judicial operation only. The Title Bureau is now under the County Fiscal Office, but not in the general fund section because they have their own source of funding. So this is the remaining piece of Clerk of Courts that is on the judicial side of things. That's the 11.1 million. Medical Examiner, formerly the County Coroner's Office. This is the budget for the general fund piece of the Medical Examiner. Now you notice it does drop by $2 million, and that is because the all funds budget for Medical Examiner includes the allocation of existing staff and expenses to the new regional lab fund budget. So if you go to the all funds page, you'll see their total proposed budget is over $10 million, but we've already set up the structure for the general operating budget of the Medical Examiner, plus we've moved current base expenditures for the proposed regional crime lab. There could be other requests to that crime lab budget. Right now, we're just reflecting the base allocation for both the operations budget of Medical Examiner and the regional crime lab budget. This is general fund only.
Director,
Yes.
did you go over the justice systems
Nope,
management?
I missed it. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. That is, right now it's a small budget of $30,000. We've basically used that line item budget for grant matches to local communities for public safety grants. Right now, we're only showing $30,000 as a base request. That may change if there are additional requests for that line item, but that's what that account has been used for in the past, is to reflect a general fund cash contribution for public safety grants. We stopped at Medical Examiner. The next account is the Medical Mart operating account. And again, this is a general fund portion. This account is set up chiefly to show the transfer out, which is an expense, the transfer out of project sources to fund the annual operating expenses of the MedMart. The sources are used for two things. One, to support the bonds we issued for construction, and that's roughly $31 million a year. It won't show up on this. It's in a different schedule. The other piece, per the trust indenture and the operating agreement with MMPI, we're also transferring out those dollars for the monthly rental, lease, and operating costs for the MedMart. And again, we're transferring sources that are being raised specifically for that project. We're not using core general fund operating dollars to support the transfer of these dollars out to the MedMart project. So again, if I mentioned earlier, we're showing the sources come in through the general fund up in that top section of our fund report, and then we're showing the expenses out either in debt service or in this operating line. You add the two together, they're close to 42 million, and then anything in excess of that is set aside as a reserve for the future needs of MedMart. Going down past MedMart, we have a capital improvement line for capital projects. Right now, we're showing a base request of $200,000. In the past, we have set aside general fund dollars for small capital projects. We decided to keep this base allocation for capital fund building improvements low. We're going to be looking at setting up a bona fide building maintenance fund, and we'll be working with Public Works throughout this process and into next year to identify a shared pool of funds, whether it's general fund or other sources, to fund some of the smaller project requests we get across the county. This building, the old courthouse, and these are projects that range from $10,000 to $100,000. Rather than show one line item, we're going to be working on what we think would be a more comprehensive way to budget for and plan out for these small project requests. And these are the smaller requests that are below the larger, more substantial bond-funded projects that you may be familiar with. So right now, we're just going with $200,000 for that. General fund, self-insurance fund. The county is self-insured for liability. And based on historical average, I'll come back to 2011, but based on historical average, we typically pay claims out in the range of $700,000 to $800,000. So what we're doing is appropriating general fund dollars in anticipation of making claims for a variety of things, whether it's moral hazard claims. We have smaller legal settlements related to a citizen or someone that comes in contact with a county employee and there's some sort of wrongdoing or accident. Those claims are paid out of the general fund in this line. If I look at 2010, not 2011, I'm sorry, 2010, there's an asterisk there. We had 2 substantial payouts related to legal settlements for the county jail for incidents that had happened several years ago. And those total $5 million. And that's why you see such a large number in 2010. Those are one-time events. They've been settled completely. We used general fund reserve and reflected the expenditure to pay those claims in the self-insurance fund budget. That's why it jumped so high. Now, an interesting thing what we've noticed with 2011 is the claims payments have been a lot lower this year. For right now, we're going to stick with our estimate of $800,000, and we'll see what we look like at the end of the year. We may or may not adjust that budget for self-insurance downward, but for now, we're going to leave it at the $800,000 level. Miscellaneous obligations. There's a variety of things that hit this account. They're broken out in Appendix A, and you have a few ORC required payments that end up in miscellaneous. One of the more substantial items that are in that miscellaneous item budget are loan payments of $250,000 per year for a loan the county took out with the state to aid the construction of Gateway. That's a large portion of that $1 million miscellaneous obligation budget. But it's basically some contractual expenses in that loan payment that make up that expense. And again, it's broken out in Appendix A if you're interested in seeing what we're paying out of there. We're not doing anything other than those very straightforward uses in that miscellaneous expense line. The next line down is statutory expenditures. And these relate a lot to, on the agenda for item 4A-4, the county has a variety of ORC required payments that we make that are in that $83,000 line item. We make a payment to the county fairgrounds of $3,300 per year. That's in there. We have a small budget for graves for the indigent, and that expense has come down over the past years. The clients that are served have changed. It's basically a service for homeless people, for homeless persons. We've spent less in that budget, but that's part of that statutory expense line. We have a small expenditure for apiary inspection. I think that's in the statutory expense line. These are all they're basically small payments. They're either dues payments or contributions that show up in that line. Memorial Day allowance, the county provides for the purchase of flags on Memorial Day. The Veteran Services Agency will plant flags on the graves of veterans, and we allot dollars, I think around $7,000 or $8,000 per year to pay for those flags and the placement of those flags. And that shows up as part of that statutory expenditure budget. Trying to see if there's anything else on this list that would hit that line. I think those are the main areas. In Appendix A, in the back, they'll be broken out.
Appendix A.
Yes. I don't have the page number, but they're in the back. And the Appendix A follows the order of Schedule 2. So the first budget you'll see will be executive, and any of the budgets that comprise that total department, and so on all the way down. So it'd be towards the middle. You'll have those broken out. I'll come back to the others in the miscellaneous category after we go through the rest of the schedule. So we go down to elected officials. We have county council's budget, which is for the staff, contracts, and any of the other approved programs that were in your base budget for 2012. We have county prosecutor, and this is for, again, general fund. So this is the county prosecutor. It's the civil division, criminal division. They also have some other divisions that fund their child support and Children and Family Services Division. They get some reimbursement dollars, but they're still general fund budgets nonetheless. And that comprises the county prosecutor. They have some smaller non-general fund budgets, but the bulk of their appropriation is in the general fund. Court of Common Pleas, this is the Court of Common Pleas general fund budget, and most of their appropriation is in the general fund. So this is for the entire court operations staff, their space, any of their IT costs, contract costs are all in there. They've had a fairly steady appropriation level in the past few years. Court of Common Pleas has worked with the county over the past few years as we've done budget reductions and because we've had to make cuts to cost because low revenue. The court has worked with the county by and large, and you can see it reflected in their level of appropriation has been fairly constant over the past few years. And the same would hold true for the other divisions of Common Pleas Court: Domestic Relations Court, Juvenile Court, and Probate Court. Most of those are fairly stable compared to 2011. Juvenile Court, keep in mind their general fund budget includes the additional annual impact of operating the new juvenile justice complex. They'll have additional staff to run the detention area. They'll have additional operating costs because it's a larger facility. And I think they also have some other costs related to being in larger space that are reflected in their proposed 2012 budget for general fund. Court of Appeals, that is the county funded portion of the Court of Appeals budget. Right now it's for 6 staff and their other expenses. We are currently have been engaged with the Ohio Supreme Court and the Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court and working with them to see if they'll be able to take on the final cost component of their staff. About $1.2 million of this $2 million allocation is related to their staff. At this point, we have, I think, a tentative agreement or a solid agreement with the Chief Justice to increase the appropriation at the state Supreme Court to allow the county to shift these expenses to the Supreme Court. I don't know if the law director has any other.
No, that is correct. I contacted the Chief Justice. She was gracious to come to the county and meet with Director Rubino and me. She agreed to assume the $1.2 million to have the state Supreme Court take that liability. The one issue is she needs to have the appropriation done, so she's going to the state controlling board to do that, and then this way it'll be removed from our budget. So we have an agreement with the court. The court is trying to get the agreement to get the appropriation from the controlling board.
So for right now, we're showing that in place. It will be changing most likely based on the discussions and agreement we've had with the Chief Justice. And that is, of the last municipal judicial costs, the county is required to pay a portion of healthcare costs for community court judges, and I guess per ORC. And it's broken out in the back section, and that's our anticipated expense based on the levels of allocation or rates we are supposed to contribute to the healthcare costs. Excuse me. I think we have some allocation for healthcare costs too in this budget.
Yeah, I don't understand how that can go down. Is it because the healthcare costs would go down because the portion of the municipal court judge salary that you pay is statutory?
Mr. Chairman and the council member, I believe it's related to the decrease in healthcare costs. We can get you additional information, but it's fairly constant. It hasn't come down too much. The last group, boards and commissions, so these are outside boards or independent entities that are county funded. They may be part of the county themselves, or they may be outside agencies that receive county dollars. We appropriate the budget or the allocation out in this group. Inspector General is the first item. This is the annualized impact of the Inspector General budget based on the staffing level and anticipated activity next year. It started midway through this year, so you see a smaller expense in 2011. 2012 is showing you the annualized impact of that operation. Department of Internal Audit, we had set aside dollars this year. Right now, we're in the process of selecting a director of internal audit. So the current expenditure on internal audit is going to be very low for 2011. What you will see, though, an expectation of having the internal audit department in place and starting to have various staff and any other expenses and contracts needed to carry out the mission of internal audit. We're showing a $600,000 or $637,000 budget for 2012. And that's assuming we'll have the director in place and start hiring staff very shortly, maybe the end of this year. We'll have staff in place and be able to have that operation underway. Bureau of Inspection was an older ORC provision to budget the cost of the annual financial audit in a separate line item budget. What we've done is taken those dollars and folded them into the fiscal office general accounting budget or financial reporting budget, since the staff in the financial reporting division are the ones that work with the auditor of state to complete the audit. So we're showing that expense, which is a contract with the auditor of state, in that line item budget for financial reporting. You can see it's gone up and down. We originally had $940,000 in 2009. Now that we're using the auditor of state, the cost has come down considerably. We're looking at around a $500,000 or $600,000 expenditure for the 2012 audit. And that, again, is part of the contracts that are in the budget for the financial reporting division of the fiscal office. Human Resources Commission, this is the newly charter-created commission. This is to fund their operation. I think they have an administrator and 3 or 4 staff, so that's the full year spend of that new commission plus any of their ancillary expenses. And it was not fully operational this year. That's why you see a lower projected expenditure in 2011. The next 2 items are part of the general fund schedule. They're levy-funded subsidies, but this schedule, it ties or foots to Schedule 1. That's why we include both the Adams Board subsidy, the $33 million subsidy, and the Metro Health subsidy of $36.1 million in this schedule. So those 2 items, almost $70 million, flow out of the levy fund to those 2 entities, and they show up on the schedule. These are not operational budgets. They're subsidy budgets that show the direct provision of support from levy dollars to those 2 entities. And those levels have remained constant since 2011. Board of Elections, $22.7 million. We're showing an increase in 2012. There's a general election next year. The approximate increase of their budget related to the general election is about $5.5 million or so. We're showing those dollars in 2012. Then you can see we back down in 2013 to $18.5 million. There's some other, I think, primary election costs that are in that 13 number. That's why it's higher than 2011. But again, Board of Elections is a good example of an operating budget that has a pronounced cyclical nature to it based on the election cycle. They, by necessity, are going to have to spend a good percentage more next year because of the election that they would in a non-election year. And that's you'll see that trend in their biennial budget. Board of Revision, it's zeroed out in this schedule because in prior years, the Board of Revision had been a general fund agency. Starting this year, we are funding the Board of Revision out of the Real Estate Assessment Fund. So if you were to turn to Schedule 5, you would see the full budget of the Board of Revision. It's not general fund anymore. We're using those dollars in Real Estate Assessment Fund now. It had been about $1 million. It's actually it's a more substantial budget. If you turn to the other page, you'll see. But the Board of Revision now, I think, is around 40 staff. And again, it's technically an independent board, but it is operationally part of the fiscal office. So you'll see it broken out separately than the fiscal office budget in these schedules because of that. County Law Library, again, that in prior years had been general fund. It's now a special use fund, so you won't see it here. We provide, I think it's 2 staff and some of the other expenses related to running the County Law Library. It's on the all fund schedule. It's also in Appendix A if you're interested in seeing the dollars they spend. NOACA, that represents our membership to the Northern Ohio Coordinating Agency. And it's been at constant levels, $174,000. And that's a budget to show the expense of transferring dollars out to pay the annual membership to NOACA. NOACA is not a county agency. They're an independent board. The Ombudsman program had been funded in 2009. We are showing 0 general fund dollars for Ombudsman right now. In years past, they had received a smaller levy subsidy. We're not showing a budget for them in this schedule. The Ohio State University Extension, this is a levy subsidy of $274,000. It's the county's contribution to fund their overall operation. Again, the operational subsidies, the subsidies that are to outside boards, show up on this report. The levy subsidies to county programs show up in that levy report, Schedule 7. You won't see them on this report. Public Defender, this is their general fund budget, which is most of their budget. It's a general fund agency, but it's important to remember they do get a reimbursement from the state. The stated reimbursement rate from the state is around 35%. So the dollars they spend, we're seeing revenue come into the general fund to reimburse us for the cost we have for providing indigent defense. Soldiers and Sailors Monument, that funds the 2 or 3 staff, and the operating expenses for the monument. The Monument Commission themselves, they're an independent agency. We're not providing them direct dollars. What we're providing is the staff and operating dollars to maintain the monument on a day-to-day basis against general fund dollars. The last one is the Veteran Services Commission. This budget is based specifically on their 0.25% mil funding level. So they take what does a 0.25 mil generate based on current assessed valuation. They devise a budget that balances to that amount. They allocate out the amounts to staff, fringe benefits, other expenses, client services, and we appropriate them at that statutory rate. Now, if you notice, if you look at 2011 projection, it looks like they have a large budget increase, but what you're seeing is the impact of what they're projected to expend. Even though they were appropriated at $7.3 million this year, they're going to spend about $1 million less. Nonetheless, we have to appropriate them each year at that statutory level, in this case 7.4 for 2012. Will they spend that amount? Prior history has demonstrated no, they probably will not, but we do appropriate them at that required rate based on the assessed valuation and 0.25% mil. And those are the general fund departmental budgets.
Okay, Director, could you continue on and explain Schedule 3?
Now, Mr. Chairman, Schedule 3.
One thing I would
Yes.
point out to everybody is if you add the 380,624 total proposed budget on Schedule 2, and you add to that the 195,475,000, you get the total of 576 million, which is the combined spend. So
Yes.
So Schedule 3 are things where the general fund plus levy provide subsidies to various other funds.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. Schedule 3 shows where are we providing general fund dollars to other programs. It also includes where we are providing levy dollars to other human service programs in other areas across the county where there are human service component costs built into operating budgets. The first section, we divide these by fund group, our special revenue funds. So in this section, you will have all of the levy subsidies. So anything that is flowing from the human service levy to another program, whether it's the large human service agencies such as Employment Family, Children and Family. You also will have any of the general fund dollars that are flowing to non-general fund programs that receive a general fund subsidy. We could just start at the top. The Forensic Science Lab is a new subsidy. It's been set up to demonstrate general fund support of the Regional Crime Lab. Right now it's at $2 million. Once we have the final plan for the Crime Lab, there will be revenue that the Crime Lab will be able to charge to user entities, and that subsidy could very well come down, but right now we're showing the full expense of the Regional Crime Lab covered by a general fund subsidy. And it's zero in prior years because this is a new entity. The next is TASK HHS, it's Treatment Aftercare Services, and I believe this also receives levy dollars. And looks like we started this year. I can't remember if this moved from a prior budget, but right now it's showing up as an HHS budget. I think it may have been in Justice Services in prior years. Public Defender, this is the human service levy component of the Public Defender budget. They have a non-general fund budget that receives some levy subsidy dollars, and that's reflected here. We have our first large subsidy, our first large levy subsidy. This is the Children Services Fund subsidy. So this is for board and care of children, separate from their operating subsidy, which we'll come down to further down the page. These are levy dollars that flow to the Board and Care of Children Fund. Planning Commission, it's an outside entity, but it's a county entity, and they receive general fund dollars. They do receive some revenue, but the rest of actually the bulk of their funding is from general fund dollars as a subsidy. Emergency management, same way. Any of these entities that are a priority or they're required to provide the service, whatever the revenue source that funds the program can't cover within the operational expense, the levy subsidy or the general fund subsidy is picking up the difference in funding. That's how we're coming up with these amounts. Youth services, I believe that was the old youth development center that had been levy supported. That's now gone. Same thing with the treatment services aftercare. I think that was moved up to HHS. Human service other programs, a lot of our discretionary grant dollars for human services were contained within this budget. It's since been moved up to the Office of Health and Human Services, so that the subsidy dollars that had flowed to that separate line item are now part of the subsidy dollars that flow to the Office of Health and Human Services. We're no longer reflecting it as a separate subsidy. COTW Support Enforcement Agency, the CISA receives levy dollars to cover their whatever they don't bring back in reimbursement revenue and administrative fees. We provide a levy subsidy to cover the balance. And some of these human service programs, they have a higher percentage of levy subsidization. Something like CISA is getting a lower level of subsidization, a smaller percentage of the revenue comes from the levy. Whereas you take the Office of Homeless Services, I think they're almost entirely levy supported. They have a very small amount of revenue, I think, but much larger degree of levy support. Certificate of Title Admin Fund, we no longer subsidize that. It's self-supporting. The revenue that comes in supports that operation. It's now gone. Office of Reentry.
Wait.
I'm sorry.
Office of Homeless Services.
I think that was the one I had mentioned. Proposed budget is it's zero. I'm not sure if we're showing that. We may be using reserve dollars to cover that. I'll have to double check. We're not reflecting a subsidy right now. We have in the past. I'll have to see where we're reflecting that now. Office of Reentry had been under Justice Services. It's since been moved to Human Services, so that's why you're seeing the prior year budget is now zero. Treatment Services, HHS, again, I think that was moved to a different entity, so we're showing the subsidy line somewhere else. Early childhood, they have two funds. This is their smaller fund. That $1 million goes to the non-public assistance fund portion of early childhood. And again, that's levy dollars. Children and witness violence, I think these were rolled up into one of the other Justice Services subsidy lines, so you're seeing zeros in the prior years. And that goes, same thing with criminal justice intervention. We're moving dollars, or consolidating subsidy dollars. I'm losing my place. No, I'm sorry, witness victim. Criminal justice is still there. And again, that's a levy subsidy. Juvenile court, we have been, for many years now, or several years, we've been flowing levy dollars for the probation cost for juvenile court. And that's what you see there.
And what about witness victim?
That one was folded up into, I don't know if we've dispensed with the subsidy. It may be in one of the other Justice Services lines. When we get down towards the bottom, maybe it'll jump out at me.
Well, witness victim is listed as $1,857,000.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're correct. We're not projecting a subsidy this year. Oh, GIS, the startup year 09, we'd provided general fund dollars. We're no longer doing that. GIS is self-supporting. They're either using their own revenue or real estate assessment fund revenue to cover the operation GIS. They no longer receive a subsidy. Custody mediation is a newer line item. We've broken that out, and we're showing a subsidy of general fund dollars to custody mediation. The next one is this is in juvenile court. It's the Youth and Family Community Partnership. These are the providers that provide the community-based correction for the juvenile detention center. And again, we're flowing levy dollars there. Family Justice Center, I think that's being rebranded under a separate program, so we're not reflecting a subsidy to that line item anymore. Common pleas, again, this is an ongoing commitment of levy dollars to some of the human service component within the Court of Common Pleas. if you remember from previous discussions we've had, around the 2007 or 8 timeframe, we identified some costs that were related to health and human services within the judicial system. And since then, we've been providing some levels of subsidy support to those areas, and you'll see these showing up in this report. Development revolving loan fund and brownfield revolving loan fund. We had some startup costs in these two funds. They are now supported with a subsidy that shows up in the debt service fund category, which is, we'll come back to that, but originally we had shown general fund dollars in a separate line item. They're now showing up under the debt service fund portion of this report, which I will get to. Soil and water conservation had received a county subsidy. I think we cut that last year. They're no longer receiving subsidy dollars from the general fund. Children and family, this is the subsidy of levy dollars to the operating budget for children and family. So this is in addition to the levy dollars that flow to the board and care fund. Office of Health and Human Services, this would cover some of the administrative costs that aren't reimbursed, plus some of the other contracts that the Office of Health and Human Services administers. Cuyahoga Tapestry System of Care, we provide levy dollars. That program works closely with juvenile court. They have the provider network that works with kids in the juvenile court system. We provide a good amount of subsidy dollars for that program. I think a balance of their funding is from the levy. Employment Family Services, this is the levy or local match for the Employment Family Services or main public assistance agency of the county. The bulk of their funding is coming from federal and state sources, so we're providing a lower level of levy subsidization than some of the other programs. Children with many medical handicaps, I think, is administered by Department of Children and Family Services, and we're also providing levy dollars. Senior and Adult Services, this reflects their levels of levy subsidy dollars on top of their intergovernmental revenue. Same thing, this is one of our mainline health and human service agencies, and they do get a good degree of levy dollars to support their operation. Early childhood, this is the other larger portion of their levy subsidy. So this amount combined with the $1 million or so at the top of this page would give you the total amount of levy dollars that are flowing into the early childhood program. Family Children First Council, again, they are mostly funded with levy dollars, and that reflects their projected levy subsidy or levy revenue for this year. Homeless services, now I remember we did a restructuring of homeless services, so we're reflecting the subsidy under a new public assistance fund. In years past, the operating budget for homeless services had been in a special use fund. This year we changed the accounting structure. We have homeless services using a public assistance fund structure. So what you're seeing is the homeless service line at the top goes away. We're now showing the dollars come in under the new fund. So it's really the same thing. It's just the budgetary construction is a little bit different. Office of Reentry was moved from Justice Services. It's now under the Office of Health and Human Services. That's why you see the line go away at the top. It's showing up at the bottom here. The last one is an ORC required subsidy of general fund dollars to the county engineer. We are to provide some general fund assistance to help operate the county map room, which per ORC, the county engineer, in this case, the Department of Public Works, oversees establishment of the county map room. The next group are debt service funds. All of these represent the county's general fund support of debt service for economic development bonds issued in years past. Right now, we have 5 outstanding bond issues that we're using general fund dollars to pay a portion or all of the annual debt service. So for Gateway, which we talked about earlier, for brownfield programs, we have 2 separate bond issues right now to fund those projects. Shaker Square, the county issued bonds in 2000 to support the construction of the Shaker Square development, and we currently have a general fund contribution towards that debt service. Commercial redevelopment is a program that was started several years ago, and again, we issued bonds last year, and we're showing the appropriated annual debt service. It's a general fund commitment of dollars to support that debt service. The debt service in turn funds that loan program. And then last year, we also issued bonds totaling $355 million for the Medical Mart and Convention Center project. The annual debt service is reflected in 2012 as that $31.1 million subsidy. And again, we're paying the debt service, but we're using the sources for the project. The additional sales tax and the 1% bed tax are the project source to pay this debt service. They're not the pledge, but they are the project source. And that's what that subsidy represents, is the commitment or the transfer out of those dollars to pay the annual debt service. Last group are enterprise funds. We support two enterprise operations right now. CRIS, which is the Cuyahoga Regional Information System. We're showing general fund dollars going in this year from the general fund to support the provision of that service to the subscribers. And the county airport, although it's come down in previous years, we are still using general fund dollars to support operations at the county airport. That's in addition to the revenue they receive from landing fees and lease revenue. It does not cover the full expense of their operation, so we have been providing general fund dollars to the airport. The last two were temporary. We had a one-year subsidy of the GIS management. That was a separate subsidy line. We're no longer doing that. And there was a county supply fund that's operated as a separate fund. We've had to put general fund dollars in there this year to make up for a cash deficit, and that's what that reflects. It's not an ongoing level of general fund dollars.
Director, thank you for
You're
that,
welcome.
that useful explanation. One other thing along the same line, could you go on the bottom of on page 2-3 and go through each of the items listed under reserves on balance, as that's an area that's gotten a lot of interest today, and explain what each of those items are.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, right now we're reflecting most of those reservations on balance in 2011. When we approve the final budget, we will shift the ongoing reservations to the 2012 column, but for now, we're reflecting them in 2011 to show the impact on the starting balance for 2012. It's more of a technical choice on how we present our reporting at this stage of budget development. When we approve the final budget, the final set of schedules with the approved numbers, you will see all those reservations move over to the 2012 column. There's no net impact on the ending balance. We're still showing the same amounts held in reserve. And we list these at the bottom of the report. So starting from the top, we show our starting balance, the money we have in the bank, where the money will come in by source, by major category. Total available resources would be the anticipated revenue plus the beginning balance. And then we have expenditures at a very high level by program or function, general government, justice and public safety, and so on. And then other financing uses would be any of the general fund subsidies. So if you were to look at that Schedule 3 we were just reviewing, the total of the general fund subsidies would match to that $43.3 million. So we have total projected expenditures of $354 for this budget. Now going back to the 2011 column, we also back out of that ending balance reservations of general fund dollars. And some of these we've always shown. There's several types of reserves. Some of them are required. They're a legal obligation. And an example would be the Gateway Bond Guarantee. The county guarantees the annual debt service on the bonds issued by the Gateway Economic Development Corporation. So these are in addition to our bonds. They have about $25 million in outstanding bonds. The county, per the original agreement with Gateway Economic Development Corporation, guarantees the annual payment on those bonds. So that, again, is in addition to what we contribute towards our own bonds. That's a legal obligation. It runs through 2014. Shaker Square, similar instance. We're already devoting up in the budget line about $130 million or $130,000 to contribute towards the debt service for Shaker Square. The remainder is shown up as a reserve because we have to show that the county can provide a backstop for the full amount of the annual debt service for Shaker Square. So it's that 130 plus the 24 or 25,000. And that's, again, is a legal obligation based on the agreements when we issued the bonds for that project. Go back up to the top. The other reserves are money we set aside for anticipated expenses or investments. So we discussed already the Economic Development Reserve and the Strategic Initiative Reserve. We're showing the set aside of general fund resources for programs or strategic initiatives that are going to be implemented or designed in the coming weeks and months. We hold those aside to show those dollars not being in the available ending balance, because this report in the end, it's not showing just the ending cash balance or bank balance. It's what do you have available of that money in the bank, what has not been earmarked or set aside for these types of uses. Medical Mart Operating Reserve, we basically take the total revenue that we anticipate to come in that's attributable to the project sources. We deduct our debt service payment and our contribution for annual operating expenses. The dollars left over, we hold in reserve for either construction contingency or for capital reserve. We will own the facility at the end of the term in 2027. So we have money set aside in reserve right now. There's going to be some policy questions to answer in the next few years. How do we use those dollars? Do we create capital reserve? Do we pay down debt early? Do we use it to help augment the operating costs? Either way, we're showing the dollars that exceed the expenses related to operating and paying the debt service is that reserve. And it changes each year based on both the debt service and the expected annual operating expense and the revenue that's expected to come in. Whiskey Island Purchase Reserve, the county purchased Whiskey Island 5 or 6 years ago. We set aside the dollars related to the annual payment related to the purchase of that park. And we use that as a general fund reserve. We actually pay that annual mortgage payment, if you will, in December. But we do show the annual cost as a reserve. 27th payroll, we have biweekly pays every, I think, 11 years. You have 27 pays on a cash basis that hit our budget. So we have to park money in the amount of what one payroll would be. Right now, we anticipate that's about 12 million. So since 2006, we've been increasing that reserve. Right now, we're at 10 million, and by 2015, we'll show $12 million or so set aside to cover that expense of that one. It's a one-time event every 11 years. We keep building that each year. Automation reserve is a reserve of dollars we've had set aside for some time now to make upgrades to technology. Right now, there are no specific projects or investments tied to that $2 million. We set this up several years ago as a placeholder, knowing that we'd have to start making some investments in some of the county shared IT, whether it's computers, hardware, upgrades to the network. We put some money aside. The amount that ends up being the total investment in upgrading some of the critical county IT components, it'll be different than this number, but for now we just have a placeholder as a reservation on balance, and we've done that for some years now. Settlement order reserve, these are dollars related to legal settlement money that came in 2004. If you remember the Grudadoria case, the investor that was prosecuted ended up making restitution to the county of over $4.9 million. Right now, I think 1.8 million of that has been shifted over to start paying for the buildup of the regional crime lab capital and rehabilitation cost. The balance of those dollars, the balance of the 4.9 is reflected as a reserve on balance because there's a purpose and a use already earmarked for those dollars. We just don't know exactly when and how they will be spent. Once we know, you'll see that reserve go away. The expense would be in a project somewhere to pay for the build-out costs and the investment costs for the crime lab. The last item is carryover encumbrance. This is related to contractual obligations embedded within each county operating budget. We want to show at the end of the year, even though you're done expending money December 31st, you still have legal obligations tied to contracts or contractual obligations. We're showing that reserve. It's a floating reserve each year. We're carrying over contractual obligations to the next year. Many contracts span multiple years. They may be not to exceed amounts. They last more than 1 year. So this reserve shows us our cash out the door, which would be our proposed operating budget, plus our total obligation, that 5.9, is what we need to set aside and anticipate to have on hand to get us through the year. And that's why we reflect that as a reserve on balance.
Okay, and Director, I presume when you're going to carry over these reserves into 2012, but then the available beginning balance for 2012 will be substantially larger than the $114,612,000 that's currently listed. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Before we net out the reserves. And what happens is each year we complete the year. Most of the case, those reserves aren't spent, but we need to shift them to the next year. So what happens is, of course, you end the year with more dollars in the bank, but again, there's still a lien of sorts on that balance in the bank because of these obligations, whether they're legal, policy directives, or again, we're setting aside money for a future event. We still need to show you, here's the money in the bank, but don't forget we have these potential uses or obligations to cover, so we can see the true unfettered balance of those dollars in this report.
Councilman Greenspan was first, and then we'll take other questions. Okay.
I just had a question going back to the Gateway and the liability there, $250,000 a year. Is that, I think I remember when we were going through our transition meetings that the city got the stadium and we got the arena when all the debt service was paid off. Is that what is that 250 for?
Mr. Chairman and the council member, the 250 is an annual loan payment.
Right.
And that goes back to when they were constructing Gateway, they ended up having cost overruns. I think one of the additional sources was a direct loan from the state. I think it was a $10 million loan with no interest. And I think that loan is paid through, I believe, I'm doing this out of memory, I think through 2017, we're making payments on that loan.
And what was that? What were the overruns related to?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
What were the
question.
overruns related
construction,
to?
I believe. Mr. Chairman, I was in college. I don't remember specifically.
Well, I'm sorry?
This was 1992 or 93, I think. They basically had cost overruns totaling $21 million, I think. And this was one additional revenue source that they were able to procure from the state to get the construction costs paid for. There were some other, I think there was another loan they took out, but this and that other loan enabled them to get the project funded and completely paid for. And now we have this ongoing annual mortgage payment, if you will, to pay for that loan from the state.
Is the city of Cleveland, are they paying any of this? Are they paying any portion of it?
Mr. Chairman and the council member, I don't think so. I'm not sure if they were involved in any of the additional loans. I think it was the county.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Rubino, for going through that so
Welcome.
well. I barely took a breath. I'm not sure if we need to get into this when we go through the actual hearings, but I did have questions on the clerk of court's budget and expenditures back to page 2.5. And the question I had was, I know that the title office was, what happened with that? Was it consolidated? Was it taken away? Where did it go?
Mr. Chairman and the council member, it's part of the fiscal office budget for 2012. And that was the Title Bureau budget is a standalone budget with a separate funding source. So that is now part of the operations division of the new county fiscal office budgetary structure. So now when you look at, in the roll-ups, when you look at the clerk of court's budget, it is the judicial component only. And the Title Bureau is now in the total budget for the county fiscal office. And if you go to Schedule 5, I think it's approximately $43 million for fiscal office. A portion of that $45 million is related to the Title Bureau budget.
So through the chair to Mr. Rumby, that explains why the expenses didn't go down significantly, because that Title Bureau had its own revenue stream, and because it really didn't go down if we eliminated all those employees.
No,
Right.
Well, the total expense did, based on the savings from the staffing reductions. They still have their own funding source, though. They have a title fund that provides funding for that operation. If it may be more helpful if you go back to the Appendix A and take a look at it's in the operations budget. I think there's a separate Title Bureau budget. If not, we can break it out for you.
It just didn't appear to go down that much, considering the loss of the staff. That's all.
We can review and get back to you if you like.
I'm sorry, page 2.5, under clerk of courts, I'm looking at the projection for 2011.
That is the judicial piece. That is the judicial piece only.
So none of
Councilman
that's
Simon.
going to change much.
As far as I know, it's not, no. Right now, they're at their base level of funding for 2012. And that's, by and large, that is general fund. Their operation is general fund.
Judicial piece only?
Yes.
And the other question, capital improvement, GF subsidy, in 2010, there was a $65 or million, I don't know what that is. What's that for, 65,000?
No, Mr. Chairman and the council member, 2010 had some special circumstances, namely because we funded the MedMart project in December. So you see a few things, and I'll work to your question. Number one, we had a large transfer out of the county of about 117 million in project sources to fund the MedMart project. So you have this big bump in expenses in the general fund for 2010, and most of that is the transfer out of those funds. We also had taken general fund dollars that had accumulated from the MedMart sources, and we used those to fund some of the relocation costs of county staff and agencies that had been in buildings that are now don't exist anymore. So for example, the Annex building and the Chicago Title building that had been behind the administration building, there were county direct costs associated with moving those staff, and we flowed all of those county related costs for moving people, for reconfiguring new space to house them in a new area. It shows up in that capital improvement subsidy budget. So in 2010, you'll see it shoot up. And most of that spike is related to the funding cost associated with moving staff. We also have cost one time related to the new council chambers, and the new renovations on the 4th floor are also part of that reconfiguration. There were one-time expenses related to rehabbing or renovating space. So that shows up in 2010 also.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Conwell.
Through the chair to Director Rubino, this is Schedule 3, page 2.2-6, under the witness victim, HHS. So you didn't provide a subsidy for this year, but we're planning on going back to the subsidy. So I just want to know, why is that?
Mr. Chairman,
Or why we didn't have it this year, because it's a very important service.
Mr. Chairman, there's been some reconfiguration within the Justice Services area. I think you may have better information provided to you when they give their presentation. But the concept of Family Justice Center and the Witness Victim and the other similar programs, they're going through some changes as they do the reorganization. I think that's why you're seeing the differences in this schedule. And I'm not saying they won't be funded or they'll be funded at previous levels, but right now, it might make more sense to see their presentation, understand how we're providing levy dollars for the 3 or 4 programs that fall within that family justice category, including witness victim.
So, Director, you're saying that it was funded in 2011, but it's in a different place?
I believe so, Mr. Chairman, but I would
Okay.
defer to the presentation of Justice Services.
Director, on that same page, could you explain why senior and adult services was it 13.65 million in 2011 budget? Projection for the current year is only 8.691, but then for 2012 it's back to 13.498.
Mr. Chairman, they received some one-time revenue from the federal government, or from the state government rather, that is offsetting the need for levy dollars. That's the main reason. And I think they've also had some lower than anticipated contractual or staffing cost in 2011. That projected expense is what drives the levy subsidization level of those agencies. When we crafted the 2011 budget, we were anticipating certain revenue levels and certain expenditure levels. And when we get to the projection piece, which is our review and update of the current budget plan, they actually need less local match dollars because of those factors this year. Next year, we anticipate them returning back to their normal level of levy subsidization based on what we know in their budget.
Other questions by my colleagues? Director, I have one closing question of a broad and general nature, and it's the SWOT question. It's looking at the county's overall financial condition. What do you see as the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for the next 2 or 3 years for the county?
Mr. Chairman, I think strengths are fairly easy. The new deployment of the county under the charter, a lot more streamlined ability with consolidation of former elected officials, and provides enhanced ability to undertake the mission of county government more efficiently. That's important, but there are other things that help that. So I think that's the major strength. The focus in the charter and the priority of economic development, I think, will pay some dividends in the coming years. So we give it a few years to incorporate the new plan and implement these new programs. I think those are our main strengths. This area has a fairly diverse base when it comes to employment. I know we're considered a manufacturing type town, but we do have other industries here. We have a strong medical sector, obviously. And if you look across the state of Ohio, for instance, or either some of the border states, we've had a tough go of it through the recession, but we've weathered it fairly well. We've lost revenue. There's state has obviously cut our support, but by and large, I think Cuyahoga County, Northeast Ohio, has been fairly resilient compared to some of the other areas, even if you just look at our peer counties in Franklin and Hamilton. So I think those are strengths that will continue to grow on that, especially now that we're seeing some rebound in the numbers for this year and going into next year. Weaknesses, obviously, is in the past, the housing market and the other economically sensitive revenue sources of the county are susceptible to any future downturns. That's a threat, obviously, but the weakness is how quickly can we respond to those changes. And the other weakness inherent is, unlike private business, we can't necessarily close down a product line or something we offer. When it comes to human services, for example, regardless of the revenue outlook, there's a certain level of mandated services and care we have to provide to our citizens. So yeah, revenue drops. Inherently, we have to continue doing a lot of what we have in the past. It's a weakness, but it's a necessary weakness because of the nature of what the county does. And again, I'll jump ahead to threat. Obviously, the threat, any future impacts from state government, if they have to go back and do a corrections bill and cut revenue further, I think that would be something severe and is a serious threat. And then an additional recession or downturn in the next year or two. I mean, we know the economy has boom and bust. I'm sure 5 or 6 years, 7 years from now, we could be looking at a similar recession. But what we need right now is a stable period for the next 3 to 4 years to catch up from what we've lost over the past 3 years. So hopefully the indicators regionally, nationwide will continue to look stable, and that uncertainty we've seen over the past year starts getting replaced with a little more certainty and a little more positive data in the way of the economic trends. Because again, most of our revenue is sensitive to those swings in the economy. Opportunities, there's a lot of opportunities. We've just started what I call County Government 2.0. Our charter is a lot different than our peers. I think there's ability to do things differently, more so than some of those other counties. I think this year has been a good experience for what we do county-wide. What are some of the other areas, opportunity-wise, internal to the county, but also looking across our other, whether it's peer municipalities or peer counties, are there other ways to consolidate or work on a regional basis with muni government and with the state government? Those are the opportunities are out there, and I think we're positioned, whether it's by necessity because of the way the cost of government has changed and the funding that provide services has changed. Nonetheless, we have this opportunity to take it head on and be proactive about how we change the way county government works for itself, but also the way it interacts with other local governments.
Okay. Any other questions? I would ask my colleagues between now and tomorrow to go into the portion of the budget book after the schedules and read through in detail the narratives for each of the departments and agencies that are going to be on tomorrow's schedule. I would ask at this point if anybody has any miscellaneous business. I have more questions. Okay, I was ready to believe you. Okay.
Lock and load, one round.
Is there anyone who has public comment not related to the agenda? No. Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn? It's been moved by Councilman Greenspan, seconded by Ms. Conwell. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned. We will resume at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning.
Okay. Maybe listen for me on NPR.
You're gonna be at NPR?
Yeah, they're interviewing me at 8 o'clock, so I'm not sure I'll be here right now. Yeah.
Oh, tomorrow morning?
Yeah.
For what?
Wind turbines and alternative energy.
We're just praying they make sense in a couple of years.
What's that, wind turbine? I got-
Anything.
my-
Listen to you on the way in. We're just praying.
My guess is they aren't, I might be on the cutting room floor.
Well, they didn't think that through too well.
I don't think.